Okay, Danae,
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
I see the screen is blank, so whatever you're trying to share is not being shared. Okay.
Hold on. Let me try that again, Mr. Mayor. Give me just a moment.
There we go. Okay, good evening and welcome to the City of Helena work session meeting. And welcome and thank you for participating in this City of Helena City Commission meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your commentary during the meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage. Madam, this meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. City Commissioner Logan, sorry, I don't have my sheet in front of me. I've got too much stuff on my desk. City Commissioner Logan.
Here.
City Commissioner Emily Dean.
Here.
Commissioner Halliday.
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here.
City Manager Harlow Schulk.
Here. Here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I got you.
Okay. I'm having Zoom issues today. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you. Welcome everyone, and I will turn this section of the meeting over to Director Kanopke and his supervisor, Madam Hollishaw.
Hey, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'll just do a quick introduction and talk about the roles tonight. So this will be my first work session. So right out the chute, I'll tell you, I don't know what you've done in the past. So we're, I'm kind of navigating blind. So that said, what I'm hoping to make sure that we provide to you is opportunity to discuss the key policy issues so that we as a team can move to the implementation and the role and the operations side. So Director Kanopke has a presentation that he'll share with you today on alternatives. And those alternatives are put together based on what we believe are the policy issues at hand, so that we can have a more specific conversation about the policy issues and then talk more about what you think the implementation should look like. Coming up with all the different ideas where it was an intention of trying to get at how could we do it, and coming up with some other alternatives that have been discussed in the past. So first, I want to make sure that Director Kanopke is ready with his presentation for sharing, and I'll let him run with it.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Let's make sure everybody can see the presentation. Okay.
Yep.
So the city code right now, the Sidewalk program currently funds about $150,000 annually. Those are put into 10-year loans with a 0% interest over 10 years. And the city pays for 50% of an ADA ramp if one is installed. And right now the city's contributions to that is the city pays all interest and administrative costs. So currently City Code 748, the adjacent property, I'm paraphrasing here so that you don't have to listen to the entire code, but the adjacent property owner is responsible for the maintenance or repair of sidewalks abutting their property. 781, every property owner within the city fronting or abutting paved brick sidewalk must remove and clear away or cause to be removed to clear away any snow or ice that form on the sidewalk in front of or abutting their property, from all portions of the abutting ADA ramps, bulb outs, and from driveway aprons on the rights of way that must be crossed for pedestrian travel according to the standards. And then City Code 713.3, we talk about encroachments and what encroachments are assumed to be allowed in the on this. And right now, encroachments are allowed for mailboxes, bike racks, irrigation, landscaping, retaining walls, fences, driveways, walkways, public utilities, etc., not presently being used for installation of curbs and gutters, sidewalks, street paving, driving surface, or any other public use. So as 713.3C, placing an encroachment in the right-of-way as permitted by this section does not grant any property rights in the city of right-of-way to the owner of the encroachment. And Section D of that code also says the city may, without advance notice, perform construction or maintenance activities within the right-of-way, and the city is not responsible for damage or any encroachments present in the right-of-way when performing these activities. That's just a highlight of what's in city code right now that pertains generally to sidewalks. Also, an internal policy that we have is kind of the 60% rule that we use. If a property owner wants to be a part of the volunteer sidewalk program and we go out and they just want, say, a couple panels replaced, but we go out there and we notice that there's more than just a couple, and in our inspection that the 60% or more of the fronting sidewalk needs repairing, then it's highly recommended that we replace it all with the program so that there's a consistent sidewalk slope through across, instead of, it's typically more expensive to try to save a couple panels here or there, and cheaper just to remove the whole thing, and then you have a fresh sidewalk across that homeowner's property. I want to pause there and ask if there's any policy questions or policy issues that the mayor, commission, or city manager have at this time.
Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question, and you might be getting to this. From what I understand, there's a 2-year wait right now in the volunteer sidewalk program. Is that accurate?
Yes, we have had difficulties securing concrete contractors, especially during COVID and prior to that. Right now, there's a lot of the contractors that we've typically used in the past are not putting in any bids because they have other work that that they already have scheduled, and they're just not putting in bids in on our like the last one we put out for the slip, trip, and fall hazards in the 6th Ward area. We received only 1 bid.
Okay, thank you.
Please continue, Director Kanopke.
So right now are some of the other assumptions that we're using for this sidewalk program is the time allowance for property owners to address concerns. If we identify a slip, trip, or fall hazard, it's an issue that the city needs to get acted upon quickly, and we notify. And this is all through the normal process. So we send them their initial letter saying that we've identified this. They have so many days to return that letter. If they choose in that first letter to go on the volunteer sidewalk program or do it themselves, then we basically skip to the trying to get this done within 30 to 45 days. If we receive no response from them, then that's when we send our second letter. And hopefully that we hear back from them on that. On the final letter, we need to just get it done, because by that time it's well within the process. So that's what we've been using. Obviously, this has some time constraints as far as weather. We can't pour sidewalk in the middle of winter or during certain conditions. So there are some exceptions to this, but the goal in talking with the city attorney's office is to get these done within 30 or 45 days is the goal of the program. Sidewalk, obstructions, concerns, and enforcement. Some of these, we've received comments about enforcement of these, particularly in, say, events, sidewalk obstructions, which fall under roadway code enforcement. And one of the things that we could look at implementing is extending those enforcement hours from 5 to 8 p.m. and on weekends. Right now, we only have 2 code enforcement officers. If we extend it into the weekends, that would require additional overtime or an additional FTE, which we gave the approximate salary and benefits costs there, about $70,000. This would go farther to start looking at not only the sidewalk structure itself, but also notices of hoses, garbage containers, and other obstructions along the sidewalks. I know this is a little bit off the topic of installation of sidewalks, but it all goes to how connected and walkable our community is for not only able-bodied persons, but for the ADA community themselves. And permitting process, this goes back to if we added an additional FTE, that person could verify the traffic control, verify the events are complying with what they said they were going to put up. So that's a couple things that we thought that could improve the program right off the bat as it stands now. Sidewalk complaints, is there a better way? So right now, we can, private property complaints, we can notify the Helena Police Department for enforcement, and as well as other jurisdictional complaints. If it's a jurisdictional, say the state or the school district, we do try to reach out to them, reaching out to our contacts within those jurisdictions and discussing the issue that we found or the complaint, and then we also forward the complaint to them. So it's kind of a team effort to get some of these complaints addressed. Before I go to the next slide, if there's any questions, I'll pause.
Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, go ahead.
for staff, please. So relative to the complaint process, how does that typically get to you?
There's several avenues that complaints or service requests get to us. Right now, we're really encouraging the My Helena app because that goes directly to our code enforcement officers. And basically, they can check their dashboard every morning and see what has come in, say since the day before or on Friday, and see which areas they have to go out and inspect. Citizens can also call in, and we enter that into the My Helena app for them. If they don't have access, they can call, they can write us a letter. Any which way we get the service request or complaint, we enter it into the My Helena app so that it's automatically generates a work order so that we can track and make sure that the concern or request is addressed in a timely fashion.
Thank you.
Director, what days of the week and or time is high need for the enforcement?
We haven't really identified like we typically do for traffic, peak AM or PM time. The past weekend with the farmers markets, the opening weekend, we did receive a few complaints on signs being on the sidewalk or having obstruction. Typically, those are pretty much, we give them a call and it's basically shaking the rust off of everybody, knowing that they knew it was maybe somebody new that set the sign out and didn't understand where it actually went. And a lot of these complaints, just by some education by the roadway code enforcement officers, go to these businesses or residents and talk to them, and we get pretty good compliance. initially, and we go from there. And if not, then we go down the path of revisiting them and readdressing the situation.
Because I was wondering if adjustment of the schedule will help.
Mayor and Commissioners, I think that would help, especially kicking off events this summer, since how there wasn't very many events last year. And like I said, everybody's probably a little bit rusty on where signs go, where they can't go, and we can adjust some schedules and make sure when they get signs from us or we have that interaction that we make sure to tell them about sidewalk obstructions and things of that nature, so that everybody is on the same page moving forward.
Any other comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask a question when you're ready.
Please.
I think we're coming to that space of wanting to be able to ask the key policy questions before we get into the alternatives. And so I just wanted to go back to the, David, could you go back one slide to the code sections, please? So first is this requirement that the property owner is responsible for the sidewalk adjacent to the property. And then the second part is this method of encroachments and alike, and wanting to make sure that first this commission is still in agreement. And I know that we're not making formal decisions tonight, but instead seeking formal discussion. We can do this at the end as well after we get through the alternatives, but just want to get some sort of consensus around this property ownership responsibility, whether there's a difference between a private property owner, a multi residential unit, and a commercial unit in that method of paying for the sidewalk, because it does change the way we look at that 60% rule. Additionally, wanting to make sure that as we go through each of these slides, so David, if you could hit the next slide. Regarding the enforcement piece, are these still the kinds of expectations for enforcement, and then even further on complaints, how you would like to move forward? So we can come back to these questions at the end. Again, ownership of the responsibility for replacement and installation. It doesn't matter the kind of ownership, residential versus business versus multi-unit residential. And then last, the enforcement piece here. So just wanting to make sure that I hit those key points before we move on. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Please continue, Director Kanopke.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So option number one is basically the program that we have now, where we have $150,000 budget annually, and the priorities would go based on the snowplow routes, where we have our emergency snow routes, priority 1s, 2s, and 3s, and then a 4-block buffer around schools. And these are routes that are used by students to walk to school. These are not directly adjacent to school perimeter. The assumption is sidewalks already exist, and not on dead-end streets. Some of these, the budget would be a 10-year loan as it is now. But one of the changes that we would look at making is having a time limit or a closure of the application period. One of the challenges that we have right now is people over the entire year can request to get their sidewalks done. One of the hurdles that we have is if someone comes in, say in July or August, and wants their sidewalks done, it's very difficult to get them added to to the contractors list, because we've already, may be winding down, or they might be in the middle of the list. So one of the things that we noticed in a lot of other communities that have sidewalk programs is they open up their application period at a certain date, and they basically do and prior to that, they've already had their sidewalk repair contract out to the contractors for bid, and it's already been awarded. So the city already knows what costs they're going to be using. They open up the program, they receive applications, and as they receive these applications, they go out and do estimates per the prices that have already been agreed upon. And as they move down there, they just keep subtracting from the funding balance. And then once the funding is exceeded or gets close, then they close the program for the year, so that the property owners, the city, and the contractor all know what's going to be constructed in that next summer season. One of the other things that we're also have on this option that's a change is to apply a 2.5% interest rate. Previously on these sidewalk programs, we go out for intercap loans, which does have an interest rate that the city has been taking care of over the past years. But we're just basically matching the 2.5% was a number that's close to what the rates are now for the intercap, but basically the loan would follow whatever the intercap loan amount would be for that year. Another change is, ADA ramps currently are only funded at 50%. The property owner is 50%, the city contribution is 50%. But in other programs throughout the city, say for our mill and overlay projects, we go out and the city pays 100% of the ADA ramps in that project area. So one of the changes that we're recommending, or one possible change, would be that the city either goes 50% across the board or 100% across the board, so that it's the programs are equitable across the city. And then the other thing is, eligible features. This is a sidewalk program. Per city code, sidewalks and curb and gutter are required. In the past, so sidewalks are obviously the #1 eligible thing. In the past, we've included boulevard walkways, curb and gutters required by city code. And then in the past, we've done driveway crossings and approaches, and a smattering of other features depending upon the property. Sometimes there's a bit of retaining wall. It's one of those things that, depending on what features that are allowed in the program, directly affects how much that program is cost effective. If we do a big, say a commercial job or another job that's a bunch of retaining walls and that's included in the program, well, that sidewalk, while getting complete, could cost, we'll just say $30,000 to $60,000. Well, that's a big chunk of the sidewalk program going to one sidewalk, whereas say an average sidewalk cost is $5,000. That 30 to 60 could get a lot of other sidewalks done. So, and then features to be reviewed on a case by case. This is where some of this would come into, eligibility based on impact to overall program. Sidewalk vaults can be very expensive, retaining walls as well. Residential walkways and stairs and other features that tie into the sidewalk itself, and other features not in the area from the back of sidewalk and to the curb and gutter. A lot of other communities that have sidewalk programs only allow for sidewalks to be done, or only allow for sidewalks and curb and gutter. They're very strict. Some have gone even as far as they're only for residential, where no commercial projects are eligible. So those are some of those, outlying questions moving forward in these other options that we've tried to address, but would love input from the commission if you have any. And I'll open this option 1 up. I guess I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or comments.
Comments or questions from the commission on option 1?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I do have a question in terms of, and I'm thinking about it in terms of, that additional interest rate. Do we have any data or any idea on the households that are taking advantage of the current program in terms of what their financial status is? Because I know the whole point is to make it affordable for people, because the average person can't afford to, spend $10,000 in 1 year on a sidewalk. But I'm just curious if we have any information on, how many people would we lose by this additional, including the interest rate in here.
Mayor and commissioners, I think it's a pretty broad spectrum of people that are on the sidewalk program. We don't track specifically income levels. That is to some effect in one of the other options that we have available. But right now that's not part of the application. It's all, and the 2.5%, we can check and see, and that could always be part of an option that if you meet a certain criteria, that interest or what have you, as you'll see in the next option, that, some of those program discussion, policy discussions can be modified by the commission moving forward.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Please continue.
So option 2 is a 50-50 program. This 50-50 program seemed to be pretty popular around the nation. I wouldn't say that there's a majority one way or the other. I can say that the majority of the cities that we looked at have similar language as to our code, that the adjacent property owners are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep. That's not to say that there's other areas that the city is 100% responsible for, but the vast majority appears to be similar to ours. And a lot of the programs that are out there are 50-50, where it's a 50-50 split between the city and the property owner. So again, priorities would be some based on our emergency snow routes priorities, 4-block buffer around schools. Program budget would be approximately $250,000, with the city contributing $125,000 and the property owners in the form of loans, partial payback or full payment of approximately $125,000. Same time limit we're recommending to make sure that everybody that knows they're going to get their sidewalks done are getting done. Same discussion with the interest rate, application and inspection fees. This the application is not there's work that goes out there, but we typically will take at least 1 or 2 trips out there during the estimate phase of this and meet with the homeowners to discuss and get their signatures on the estimate if they want to move forward. There's also other inspections that could be included in this as informed checks or the final inspection to make sure that the sidewalks are compliant. That's where what's included in that cost. An additional 25% city contribution for applicants 65 and older or disabled owner occupants of non-commercial properties of 4 units or less. That's Commissioner Dean, where I was saying there was some additional contributions that the city could make depending upon criteria that the commission can set. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are a lot, several of the communities that we looked at that have the 50-50 program add in some additional city contribution for different groups of people, whether that's 65 or older, or disabled, or meeting certain criteria. So that's an option moving forward. Again, the discussion of the ADA ramps, and moving forward into these programs or options that the city has more contribution on. I think the discussion of eligible features comes more into play. So sidewalks, boulevards, walkways, or are we going to allow sidewalk vaults, retaining walls, residential walkways? Again, it just goes back to the fact that the more money that's spent on either individuals or cumulative effect affects the overall performance, economic performance of the program. So, but in this case, this is the 50-50 program. Not too much different than what we have now, other than the 50% city contribution and application, and then probably tightening down on what features are eligible in the program itself. I'd be happy to ask any or answer any questions on option 2.
Mayor,
Go ahead,
Mayor,
Commissioner.
I have one question. Just, this is probably a dumb question, but just to make sure that I'm clear on this. So option 1 and option 2 are both like voluntary programs. It would be individual residents applying for the program, similar to the way that we have it right now.
Mayor and Commissioners, that's correct. They would be volunteer programs. They would also be those people or properties that had a complaint or service request in front of their homes, that if they had a slip, trip, or fall, that they could be part of the program itself, so to help offset the cost.
Okay. And then just a follow-up question on that. So I guess related to maybe slip, trip, and fall, if that should potentially also be a priority. But I'm just curious your perspective of this concept of prioritizing. Tell me a little bit about sort of where applications within the city are coming right now. Is it primarily folks that are related to it's complaint driven of slip, trip, and fall? Is it people just individually wanting to install sidewalks? Is there a nexus for snowplow areas and around schools specifically under our current voluntary program? Like, do you see more applications in those particular areas now?
I would say most of our are probably residentials, but in the past couple of years, with the code enforcement being out doing the snow removal or going and inspecting the emergency snow routes, and those priority routes are those main routes people are using to get between places. So we see more, I guess, recent complaints and probably more recent users of the program along those routes. So that's why we chose to kind of use those as priority. But another one of the, the questions that we get is, why is it complaint driven? Why aren't we actively out there walking the sidewalks? There's a lot of areas out there that we could be walking and sending out a lot of letters to get things fixed, but right now in our past policy has been always complaint driven, unless an individual property owner wants to come in and voluntarily get their sidewalks fixed. So Previously, I would say that it was more voluntary, and probably less than half were, maybe slip, trip, fall complaints. Now it's getting a little bit higher. Maybe it's upwards of 30%, maybe these slip, trip, and falls. But, if we're going to require the homeowners to replace these within 30 or 45 days, then they obviously would be a priority as a safety issue. So maybe that priority is not explained well enough, but we would put in safety. Slip, trip, and falls would be a priority with respect to those complaints.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Please continue.
So option 3 would be basically slip, trip, and fall hazards only, and leave the property owners with the current city code to repair their sidewalks. As the commission is aware, when we went through the 6th ward in preparations for mill and overlay, we identified significant amounts of slip, trip, and fall hazards. One of the ways that we're looking to try to mitigate some of these is I don't have a breakdown of vertical deflections versus deteriorated sidewalks, but a lot are these half-inch vertical deflections and maybe up to an inch. There's been some that the entire panel has been pushed up by a tree root, but some of these smaller vertical deflections, we're looking at purchasing a sidewalk grinder that we can go out and mitigate these smaller kind of nuisance trip hazards at a lot less cost than replacing the panel themselves. So that was, sorry about the sidebar on that, but with this program, it would be residential only. It would be only identified or reported slip, trip, and fall hazards are eligible. We'd have a funding limit, same with the time limit and the interest rate and application and inspection fees. And then, the same discussion around the ADA ramps.
Comments or questions from the commission? Please continue.
So the next option is option number 4. It's basically creating a sidewalk district in the city. As some of you aware, we did do a inventory, and we have quite a big bill in front of us to fix either the sidewalks or the missing sidewalks in areas. So this would be a citywide sidewalk district. It may require an election to get the public's agreement on it. The priorities would be to create the fund for all sidewalk work, repair, replacement, and new installs. It may be based on the snowplow routes so that we can get those those major routes fixed and connected so that they're walkable, and then we can work out into those prioritized areas. That's not to say that if there was a school or something else that would trigger a safety issue or just something that came up case by case, we would look at. Same 4-block buffer around the schools, and the funding limit. We'd start at somewhere maybe 300,000 and ramp up the program depending upon the availability of contractors. That's one of our major drawbacks right now. I do believe that if the concrete contractor community realized that the city was going to be putting out a 200,000 or 300,000 or whatever the dollar amount is every year at a specific time to where they could bid on it, that we would get a lot more participation in there, and then they would be looking at that as a consistent stream of income or revenue year after year, because obviously our sidewalk connectivity problem isn't going to be solved in 3 to 5 years. It's a monumental task to take on right now. So it's going to be there for a while, and I think we can really attract a lot of contractors and get that competition in town here and start seeing more contractors competing for these monies, and getting more realization out of the monies with the competition. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on option 4.
Comments or questions from the commission?
Mayor, I have one question.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I just would be curious if you have thoughts specifically on kind of what that ramp up would look like. And then, I mean, I know this is probably too far ahead of the game, but just like, have you all kind of estimated if an election were to take place, like what would be, the mills needed for kind of what you project out for a ramp up, and what the potential cost could be on an individual residential homeowner?
Mayor and commissioners, we are currently working with finance to get those costs per the average household, or cost per lineal foot. However, we don't have those numbers of yet. It's a big ask. I mean, we have a lot of missing sidewalk out there, not due to one reason or the other, just that's what we have. So I would be happy to, as soon as we get those numbers more refined, emailing you and the commission on what that actual cost looks like, and potential payback of those costs. And again, without the contractors being there, it's very difficult to be able to say we're going to do $2 million worth of sidewalk a year, but when we can't even get a contractor to bid on it, it's very difficult. So it would be a very concerted effort, not only to get it, say on the ballot or in an election, but also working with local contractors. I can't see that if we were doing $2 million worth of sidewalk work that we would not have interested contractors, but it would just be part of the process that we would have to work locally and even outside of Helena to, let that be known that this is what's coming down the pike if this were to move forward.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I think this is just kind of a, I guess, process question for when you are doing those internal numbers, I guess for David and Rachel, but is it possible if we could, with that, get an idea of what the cost would be if we focused, for example, only on like these priority sidewalks as well, to get a better idea of, if there's a scaled back version that might be more attainable, what that would actually cost?
Mayor and commissioners, we can certainly look at, scaling it back to more of the, say, the emergency snow routes, priority 1s, 2s, and 3s, which would probably include most of the 4-block buffer around schools. So we could see what, we could give you a rough estimate of what those costs would be.
Thank you.
Also, Mayor, Commissioners, also with the Finance Director Danielson, we have a variety of assessments and fees that are being reviewed for more structural evaluation as well. There's been conversation around other priority needs in the organization. So given that this is a finance, this is the budget conversation, it's a good opportunity for us to hear the priorities. Clearly, our assessment, evaluation, and fees are around current and existing services and activities in the organization and in the community that the city offers. In those gaps, as we look at our budget and the things that we have continued to talk about, know that whenever there, I'm sure you already know this, but just as a reminder, when we put ballot issues out, and at the same time we have assessments and fees that go up because of a good study, we just want to make sure that you get a full picture of what would be asked of a community. So know that that is also part of the conversation. Where does this increase, if this were to be an option the commission wanted us to investigate, where does that fit in the bigger concept of the fees and assessments conversations that we're having as well? So I think that's an obligation we have to you all.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the commission? Please continue, Derek. Oh,
Apologies there.
Go ahead.
Maybe one more quick question, if Director Knapke knows. Apologies if you mentioned this, but is there any other municipality in Montana that has a sidewalk district?
I don't recall finding one. Kalispell does a 50-50. They all have their own kind of form of sidewalk. Missoula has theirs. Where we did run into some of these, say, bond issues or bonded sidewalks, we're in the larger cities. I believe Portland or Seattle had one that they block off. They just have a certain area that they block off every year that they do, and that's what's going to get done. Other communities have done that as well. I will say probably I didn't see that as much as maybe a 50-50 program versus say a bonded issue.
Any other comments? Please continue.
So option 5 is kind of a supplemental option. It's a sidewalk crew for the city, to where we would hire on as one FTE, a full-time employee that has that sidewalk and ADA experience, kind of like a foreman, hire them on full-time so that we could retain that knowledge and expertise, and then hire on 2 to 4 long-term temps in the summer that they would be working on the sidewalks. I see this initially starting off as small to medium-sized projects, depending upon how everything works. They would be created just for mostly repair of these small and medium-sized, and possibly some other city work that may need to be done where we might not be able to get a contractor in, and we need to get a valley gutter replaced or a piece of curb replaced or something that we could divert them to do that fairly quickly. So the 1 FTE salaries and benefits obviously doesn't include any materials, or is about $70,000, and then long-term temps are about $52,000 each. We do have some in-house staff that have worked with concrete in the past, but not, we have them, their responsibilities are in other areas, but we could, pull them as a stopgap measure. But, we felt that this might be one of those that some of these smaller projects could take advantage of, and would be, this crew could be the same ones that go out and use, say, a sidewalk grinder to grind down those small trip hazards, or replace a panel 2 or 3 to benefit the citizens more than trying to get a contractor in there to do 2 or 3 panels, which would be more likely more expensive.
Comments or questions from the commission? Please continue.
Mayor and Commissioner, those are all my options that I have for you tonight. Or this afternoon. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that have come up, or have more in-depth conversations on revising any one of these options or maybe doing the mix match. But be here to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Kanofsky.
If I
Madam-
may, Mayor, just to close this out and push back to you all.
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to circle back on the key priority areas of policy that were out on the outset discussed in this role of the city and the private property owner, and is there a distinction between a homeowner in a particular financial state, a homeowner, property owner who owns multi-unit residential versus business? Those just additional layers that all come into play within these additional options, and then also knowing this bigger picture of the contractors and the time that it takes to get them in, having a larger bulk type system may actually, especially since many times we're doing one-offs in particular parts of town, larger dollar amounts and larger unit sections can yield perhaps better contract competition. But also then on enforcement, how do we handle enforcement? We have not only ADA that we need to be assuring compliance with on these private property owners who are, putting flags and alike into the sidewalks that ultimately impact our ADA compliance as well, but also the replacement. So not only just day-to-day maintenance and management of those sidewalks, but replacement and even installation in some areas. So thanks so much. That concludes even my addition to this conversation. So I'll step back.
Yeah, thank you. Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
in option number 4, it talks about a creation of a district. Why not a bond?
Mayor and commissioners, it could go either way. It could be a bond, it could be a district. It was basically the larger option of identifying a large amount of sidewalk and creating the funding mechanism so that we could address it year after year instead of knowing that we would be moving forward with sidewalks, whether it's bonded or in the sidewalk district, that we would have a specific amount of money every year to address those sidewalk concerns.
And then, Mr. Mayor, one more, I guess, sort of follow up, probably to the latter options that are less maybe voluntary than others. What opportunities do you see as the public having input on what's happening in the right of way, I guess, adjacent to their properties? Like, and we encountered this on the sort of, case by case sidewalk variance requests and that sort of thing. So what in these options that are maybe a little less than voluntary, what options do the property owner have in providing input? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director?
So, those are those city codes that we referenced in the beginning, where we do allow encroachments onto city right-of-way, but when it's deemed that the city needs to use that right-of-way, that we're able to do so. I think that there would have to be interaction that we, can't address things on a case by case on every property, but we've had conversations of, say, sidewalks up on Winnie, where the south side would be extremely costly to install sidewalks behind the back of curb there. And Winnie provides the opportunity to have a few options that we could either install behind the back of curb, or we could move the curb line out 5 feet and install the sidewalks. And then we don't get into the retaining walls and other features that are up there. So I think there's always the opportunity to have that discussion. Unfortunately, in some areas, that those options are very limited.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Knopke.
You bet. Comments or questions from the commission? Okay. At this time, is there any comments from the public? Madam Clerk, do we have any raised hands?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have several hands raised. The
Okay.
first I will start with is Wilbur Riemann.
Go ahead, Mr. Riemann. Go ahead, Mr. Riemann.
I was muted. Sorry for that delay. As chair of the Non-Motorized Transportation Advisory Committee, we're very concerned about getting sidewalks, especially around schools. For instance, we've been working on that Knight Street sidewalk for over 3 or 4 years now, and that's finally starting to move. But there are other schools where even in my neighborhood, right down a block away from where I live on Hollins Avenue, Broadwater School has virtually no sidewalks except on the north-south streets, but all the east-west streets coming in and feeding to the school have no sidewalks. And I'm just wondering if the commission and Director Knopke could speak to what do we do about getting kids safely to school without sidewalks?
Thanks for the comment, Mr. Ryman. Madam Manager, do you want to address this or you want to hold off until we can start the formal discussion on this?
I'm sorry, are we taking comments or taking questions for
We're just
response?
taking comments.
Okay, no, at this time, I want to make sure that the commission has the space that they need to make comments and questions. But as far as prioritizing, I think what we tried to do tonight was to make sure that to give you an idea of the options and alternatives available
Yeah.
to the city.
Okay.
To choose. And then I don't think anyone's not prioritizing children and their safe walks to school. I think the bigger problem is that it's just a complex conversation, in my opinion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Clerk, any other raised hands?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, next I have George McCauley.
You have the floor, Mr. McCauley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commission. I really appreciate y'all letting me be a part of this discussion. I have a couple of comments. I think that there's a really an important need to fix those sidewalks that are obviously a problem. I think let's do this first, and then other kind, like where there aren't any sidewalks, can be addressed after these, what I think y'all called them trip and fall. I mean, they're ubiquitous all over the city. In my opinion, we should concentrate on getting those done first, and then move on to where there are no sidewalks. I mean, with the exception of school, let's make sure our kids are safe. And I believe if we come to, I mean, I was a recipient of the wonderful sidewalk program more than 10 years ago. I think if we should ask our citizens to participate in making our city safe, and by taking some responsibility to be part of the program. And I believe that the city has funded it from the beginning. Would be in favor of adding a small interest rate to that cost of fixing the sidewalks. I also believe that if you go to the citizens for property tax, you're going to continue to property tax people out of their homes, me included. So sort of in conclusion, I'm impressed with all the work that y'all have done, and particularly David Knopke, in these options. I think 3 and 5 or some kind of combination are wonderful. But in the most, I'm just very impressed that y'all are handling this so well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, next I have Greg Worth.
Go ahead, Mr. Worth.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Greg Worth. I'm also a member of the City of Helena Non-Motorized Travel Advisory Council with Chair Raymond. And we certainly appreciate the sidewalk discussion this afternoon. And we're willing to be further engaged in, refinement of any of these options. We'd certainly like the opportunity to review all the options and provide our recommendations as well. I know from speaking with other city residents, the voluntary sidewalk program, has been very well received in the past, and I think it's a great benefit to the city. The sidewalks are very, very important for numerous reasons. One thing I would like to point up to is this Chair Raven mentioned the sidewalks around school. One of the outstanding issues we've been talking about also is the section of sidewalk on Broadwater Avenue, which goes from Euclid Avenue down to Montana Wild. This is where the Montana Department of Transportation installed the rapid flashing beacon, pedestrian activated rapid flashing beacon. And we have had numerous motions to advise the city commission to install this missing section of sidewalk. It's a relatively short section, but would provide the immediate connectivity between Montana Wild and the new pedestrian crossing. And we've talked about different options there, but this is a kind of a, regardless of any refinements to the voluntary sidewalk program, we've identified as a section of sidewalk that would need an immediate section of sidewalk to provide the full connectivity. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Worth. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, I have no further hands raised. I've received no written public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any final comments from the commission?
Mayor, just a couple. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious what our next steps are. I mean, we've done this, we've seen these. Is this being elevated to a decision point at some point? For me, missing from this discussion is the question of just non-motorized improvements in general, separate from, just sidewalks alone, how we fund sidewalks during projects like Rodney, Beatty Street, Knight Street, or any place that we're doing construction, since we've talked mostly about voluntary sidewalks or one comprehensive city bond. So what are the next planned steps in this?
Thank you, Commissioner Halliday. Madam, Ms. Halshaw?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, so the request for the sidewalk conversation was in response to the number of questions about how to move forward and addressing what has been a pretty drastic gap in sidewalks citywide, but most importantly for those that have been the 3 to 4 year conversation. So that was the reason that we zeroed in on sidewalks. So the other part of your question though is this bigger picture question, which we were actually discussing today, and that is this conversation of what is the method of construction by the city when we do projects. And I think that valid policy question is one I think that is the larger question we really haven't asked you all. And that is this, the method, the opportunity really in the growth plan and the neighborhood plan conversation that's currently taking place, and actually looking at the city as a neighborhood concept when we do projects and what that actually means. Is it just the infrastructure? Is it the infrastructure, the sidewalk and the roadway? Is it the infrastructure, the sidewalk and the roadway and beautification? Is it lighting? Is it districting? Those are all layers within neighborhood conversations that we were having this morning. those are philosophical policy questions that we really haven't had with you all. And it might be the best way for us to start a really good conversation around method of management in our CIPs and construction overall. So just to underscore that, Commissioner Halliday, you must have been reading our minds this morning, because we directly were having that conversation about what it is we're trying to do with our projects as a capital improvement program. I hope that helps to answer your question. I don't know that I have an answer at this point, because I feel like it would be a good opportunity for us to discuss perhaps what the commission's expectations are overall.
Thanks. I mean, that's helpful. You know, in just my limited time, the most comprehensive sidewalk work we've really done, right? We have one-offs with voluntary participants, Mr. McCauley, myself. I was a volunteer sidewalk recipient a number of years ago. But the most comprehensive sidewalk solutions that we've done during my time on the commission have come through comprehensive infrastructure projects. That's where the bigger solution is, right? Front Street is a great example. Originally, that was going to be just a lay down asphalt on top of stormwater pipes. And the commission stopped and said, no, this is the opportunity to revision a street for pedestrian safety, for better parking, rebuilt those sidewalks, and recognized that that was a large scale city solution on that one. Beatty Street, another example, finishing out safe connectivity. Rodney Street is going to be a huge sidewalk endeavor. Again, all city financed. Those are the places where we've actually done the greatest swings for comprehensive sidewalk solutions. That's why I'm curious about hearing about those. This is a great program. We should continue to look for all of the ways to make it more accessible and more used, but the real comprehensive swings are going to come through use of street maintenance money or other funding sources that build out these larger scale projects and do sidewalks as part of them. The last thing I would note is that we do have a policy in our street maintenance district, which exists already on the books, that says every year, any infrastructure projects that we are funding through street maintenance, right, that are set forth in our budget, 10% of that budget has to go to non-motorized projects, or if they're not going to be used for non-motorized, that part of that project, it gets set aside in a reserve fund. So we already have a 10% budget set aside for sidewalks in all of these street maintenance districts. It's already there. Sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less, but I should note that we put that into policy a number of years ago, that the city was going to be a participant and do these non-motorized sidewalk projects when it did regular street infrastructure improvements in general.
Thanks for that information, Commissioner. Much appreciated. Commissioner O'Loughlin?
Yeah, I just had a couple thoughts. And I think city manager was sort of emphasizing this as well, as what is our ultimate goal? And I think that there are probably multiple goals that we might want to explore. I mean, I think in my mind, prioritizing connectivity and sort of these priority areas or locations within the city that we really view sidewalks to be paramount. I think that in my mind, and I think we've explored what that looks like as far as safe routes to schools, as far as what is the city's investment in ensuring that kids can safely get to school. That could potentially be one goal, and we could approach it in one way. I think it seems like maybe another potential goal is to expand the usage of the voluntary program. I guess personally, I would say that might be less of a priority for me, and only that I think it just sort of results in what we've seen before, kind of checkerboard installation of sidewalks that may not necessarily sort of meet the goal of connectivity throughout particular areas of town. And then I think the third is addressing slip, trip, and hazards. And I think that's what George is really touching on, that I think could also be addressed through a different mechanism, right? I also really liked the concept of option number 5 and exploring what does our capacity look like in supporting that. In my mind, these could be 3 different buckets of funding and priority, right? I don't think we necessarily have to say we have this one size fits all policy and this is how we're going to go about it. I think if that's what we want to do, it's probably going to be about what we have today, and not necessarily result in improving sidewalks throughout, key areas of town. And then I think the one, in addition to what Commissioner Halliday said about specific projects, I think one other thing that I would love for us to explore is how we might be able to prioritize at least a portion of our TIF funds for sidewalks in those districts. That is something that Missoula has done. I recognize Missoula has, bigger TIF districts and greater amount of revenue coming in from their TIF districts. But I think that's something worth exploring, especially now as we're building out those increments, and we're going to see them grow over time. Do we want to say, as a policy, we'd like to prioritize, a percentage of those funds to be used to improve sidewalk connectivity within that district or kind of the adjacent area? So that would be another thing that I think it would be really worth exploring. But in my mind, like, this has been really helpful to kind of, for me, categorize what are the goals, and then ultimately how do we finance, to meet those goals.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Loughlin. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
just a couple. I think both the city manager and Commissioner Halliday touched on this. I do think that there are like a couple bigger policy questions that we need to address, particularly that piece of what do we do in terms of larger projects? Because I think that that's one thing that I consistently hear from people really like the volunteer sidewalk program, but folks will say, I'm all for paying for sidewalks, but if it's, how do you prioritize which projects it's actually going to, and why are you prioritizing one project over another? And I think that spelling out, what that is within a policy would give clarity to folks and also an opportunity for feedback. One thing, just with how popular the volunteer sidewalk program is and the backlog that we have, I do think that it would be worth, exploring how do we solve getting rid of that backlog. And I know David talked about, a lot of that is the lack of contractors. Yeah. And I think, with Commissioner O'Loughlin mentioning option 5, is that a way that we do solve that problem? I don't know when I know the city used to have staff that would do it. I feel like it was probably like 20 or 25 years ago, though, that happened. And I'm sure David would know when the city got rid of doing that in-house. But I do think that there's opportunities to, address this in a few different ways, since there are different decision points here. But I do think that, getting rid of that backlog would go a long way, because there are so many people who I just talked to neighbors who are interested in doing it and are not even on the list, simply because they know, they're 2 years out anyway. And with this market, will they move or not? That's something that I think is maybe easier, lower hanging fruit for us to maybe address. But I do think that one of the big pieces is going to be, and I think this is where the public is most interested as well, what is the policy around these larger scale projects, in terms of what we prioritize the city pays for or not. I'm also really interested in finding out the cost of, if we only I think it was option 4, 4, if we did just focus on those priorities and went to those priority areas and went to the voters, is that something they're interested in? That price tag, I would really like to know. So this has been super helpful, and Director Knopke and Manager Harlow-Schalk, thanks for all the work in this, and definitely it's given me more to think about too. So really appreciate the effort on getting these options together.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor, I
Commissioner.
have a question for Mr. Knopke, although I don't expect him to know off the top of his head. So if he says, I don't know, fair enough. Do you know how much the sidewalk portion of the bid is expected to be or was for Rodney Street reconstruction?
I doubt it.
I don't, but I can get that number to the commission fairly easy. There's a couple bid items, but if the discussion lasts long enough, I might be able to get that before the end of this meeting.
I mean, what I'm interested in, right, is according to our own rules, we've budgeted $200,000 for sidewalks, or at a minimum, non-motorized construction for Rodney. We budgeted $2 million in our long-term debt. That may be for next year's. I'd have to look back at the previous years, right? But I'm curious whether we're spending $200,000 on sidewalks, whether we're expected to spend more. But it seems like wherever we want to put it, we have said as a commission, $200,000 of Rodney project is for sidewalks. Same thing with any of these projects to date. I mean, technically Benton turn lanes, which is in our budget for this year, $60,000 should be going towards non-motorized infrastructure improvements there, because that's our sort of ordinance policy at this juncture. So whether we're high or low, it just seems like we've at least put a dollar amount that we've said is a value towards sidewalks, just like we've said it's a value to put asphalt on streets or to make curbs and gutters. Sidewalks are part of a complete street and part of a comprehensive transportation strategy. And that's why they get built on a project like Rodney and fixed on a project like Rodney.
Thank you, Commissioner. Final comments?
Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'd just like to thank the city manager and Director Knopke for the presentation. It was very helpful. As you all have said, there's a lot to think about, and I'd like to thank the commission for I think we've kind of gathered some, maybe not so overtly, but we've gathered some priorities that we have. I mean, safe routes to schools, for example, as being a priority, slip, trip, and fall hazards being a priority for us moving forward, and so I think those will give us a lot to think about, in addition to the some of the major projects that Commissioner Halliday pointed out. And I'd also like to thank those in the public that took the time to share, and particularly Mr. McCauley reminding us of that that important need for addressing this trip and fall hazards. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Harlow-Schalk, thanks for this information. It was valuable, and I hope we'll be putting on the agenda soon to move forward with these projects, because they are very important for our community, and I think we should move forward with it. But also, you're looking for contractors too, right? Because that's part of our stall. So if you have contractors out there, tell them to give us priority.
Great.
Mayor and Commissioner, real quick.
No, let me finish real
Okay,
quick,
sorry.
and then I'll give it to you. So, Madam Manager, what's your next step in this?
Thank you. I understand and I heard now, I believe I heard consensus. So I want to just reaffirm that I believe I heard consensus around options number 3 and 5 as being the most interesting to you all. that there are really priorities, obviously, number one, safe routes to schools, and two, slip, trips, and falls, and that none of those actually are a straight line to funding, that those have different methods. And I think Commissioner O'Loughlin put it well when she said that there's definitely not one answer to funding all of these, but a variety, and that the lowest priority being the expansion of the usage of the voluntary program, but really to have the city step up and into that space. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is.
And then I also understand that you had requested I put this onto the agenda. In the future, what I would like to do is talk with our team internally and bring it through the budget process for conversation as we get into the capital improvement program, because there's opportunity, I believe, within that to talk about this additional layer that Commissioner Halliday brought up, and that is this the method of deploying our projects as well. So we could be not only going after these safe routes to school and being more clear in that route, but also when we do our own projects and look at those projects on that capital improvements list, which you all have gotten, that we're starting to group them together and look at them more comprehensively as a neighborhood.
And
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, I know we're just kind of tacking on here, but I just want to be clear, when I talk about safe routes to schools, and when I talk about, any connectivity project, what we're talking about today was great and informative, and I'm glad we've had this presentation. It doesn't get to the heart of safe routes to schools, right? Because as long as the program is only voluntary, we can't make someone put a sidewalk in unless the commission's going to have the political will to go in and say everyone on Ninth Street needs to put a sidewalk in, right? That's why Broadwater hasn't happened, because that's been on our. We've had MTech ask us. I can't tell you how many meetings now, but this commission's been unwilling to say order that sidewalk in for safe routes to schools, right? So the voluntary program alone doesn't do it. It could help us encourage people. Maybe if we're going to stop people from, you wouldn't let me do it, right? My lot might not be a safe route to school, so maybe you don't want to give me money in the future. And someone near Broadwater School wants to put theirs in, but we can't force people to do it unless we choose to actually force people to do it, or we come in with a comprehensive city project. So that's where I'm looking for a broader discussion, because I actually think, as Commissioner O'Loughlin pointed out, this is probably the least of our effective tools for connectivity and comprehensive sidewalk change is the voluntary program. Even tinkering with it and turning it into an internal city sort of, stopgap foreman kind of fill stuff is going to be less comprehensive than doing real substantive projects. And so, yes, I agree with this, safe routes to schools consensus, et cetera, but we need something far more broad policy wise. I don't know if we're having another meeting on this, but we really should be having a much more substantive meeting if we want to talk about how we truly fund safe routes to schools or large scale connectivity. This program will not do it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr.
Mayor?
I was going to Director Kanopke, and then we'll come to you, Commissioner Logan, and then Commissioner O'Loughlin. Director?
Mayor and Commissioners, sorry to interrupt, but the bid for the Rodney Street specifically, there was $222,000 for new sidewalk, $30,000 for the new rectangular rapid flash beacon, another $36,000 and change for ADA ramps, and there was another $25,000 in there. So, pretty sizable amount of money in there. Plus, we also, through the mill and overlay program, we budgeted around $366,000 for ADA ramps throughout the city.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Logan?
Thank you. Just, I guess, maybe to Commissioner Halliday's comment, relative to safe routes to schools, for example, that's one of the things that sort of intrigues me about option number 4 is, I think we have an inventory. I get a sense that we have an inventory of those needs. And if to me, it would seem pretty straightforward to ask the public if they share that. And if, you know, put that to them, that community need to them. And I don't think there's any more direct way to do that than an election. And that could be a way to fund that significant need. So I think that's a viable opportunity.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Laughlin.
It was me.
Oh, sorry. I apologize.
I know.
Commissioner Dean?
I mean, Commissioner Locke might have something else to say. I don't know. Just kind of, I think one thing that might bring a lot of this full circle too is the comment that the city manager started with at the beginning of this is the connection to those neighborhood plans. And I do think that within, especially when you're talking about, you know, these larger scale projects, following those neighborhood developing and following those neighborhood plans, I think is a really good opportunity to make sure that we are addressing, you know, the wants, needs, and desires of each particular neighborhood. And I think a good example of that is everyone's super excited on Rodney about the improvements that are coming, but definitely one in which, you know, there was a lot of opportunity for participation and moving forward in a way that, you know, we're finding common ground or resolving other disagreements. So I do think that the neighborhood plan route is a good opportunity when we're talking about larger scale projects to make sure that it is reflecting, you know, the needs of the neighborhood and what they're looking for as well.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Halder, you on the roll today.
That's the beauty of work sessions, Mr. Mayor. We actually talk for once. You know, going back to the issue of, you know, we've passed over option 4, as Commissioner Logan brings up a number of times. I think because number 4 is the sort of one of these is not like the others, right? The others, when you look at them, are all targeted towards very pinpointed solutions. Single property owners here or there, slips and trips. I want a sidewalk in front of my house. Option 4 is a attempted comprehensive solution. Not a very targeted or nuanced one, but it's you know, it's some kind of hacksaw for attacking the larger scale sidewalk issue. I think that one actually belongs on a different discussion if we really want to talk about how we attack large scale sidewalk problems, whether they be existing deficiencies, lack of sidewalks. And that's where, because bond, district, levy, TIF funds functioning for neighborhoods, those are all sources of funding for that separate discussion of, are you going to do a significant outlay of cash to attack large scale connectivity issues, safe routes to schools? So, you know, I wouldn't say that option 4 is bad out of hand, but I don't think option 4 really was as didn't belong in this group today. They're 2 separate discussions, 2 different buckets, as Commissioner Laughlin said. But option 4 has a value, and it should be part of a much broader conversation that this commission should have on how to address, how to draw on funds, how to tackle these projects, whether they're commission driven like Rodney was, neglected for years, or whether they're community driven through neighborhood plans, or whether they come through our advisory boards. We need to have sources of funding to do those larger plans. The transportation, street maintenance district 1, gas tax is another, an optional future district or levy is another, TIF funding is another, right? Build or formerly Tiger funds are another. Those need to be, in order to tap some of those and to plan for them, you really do have to have comprehensive planning to start for those, not just the creation of sort of $150,000 checkerboard programs.
Thank you, Commissioner. Go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin. You're
Thank you,
muted.
Mayor.
Okay.
I just maybe in reaction to Commissioner Logan, bringing up option 4, I actually appreciate that it was on this list and that we are able to kind of have some initial conversations about it. I think initially, my sense of it was that maybe this is something worth considering. I think I'll just say where I'm at right now. I think that we've got a little bit of work to do to explore the best use of the taxpayer dollars that we have today and how to prioritize the installation of sidewalks with the resources that we have. I think we have a number of opportunities, particularly given that we've had some, influx of additional funds for infrastructure come in to the city or will come in this upcoming fiscal year, that we can say, yes, this is a priority. We want to invest in ensuring safe routes to schools. I think we're at a good place to potentially look at something like Knight Street, which has been sitting out there for decades now. So I'll just say, I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. I mean, I think I'm definitely open to continuing to explore the potential of sort of a bigger, citywide sidewalk program that is financed through a different mechanism. I think that's a pretty significant conversation that needs to be had. I mean, we, as you remember, Mayor, did not walk into the conversation about the fire levy lightly. I mean, that was, a year and even before our time, I think a lot of conversations that happened about what is it that we would want to take to the voters. So I think that there's some short-term opportunities that we can seize. I definitely hear, my fellow commissioners saying we want to have kind of what a policy looks like. I think that's really doable, right? I think we can think about a policy of really prioritizing state resource or city resources for things like safe routes to school that allows us to continue to move forward with some of these projects. And then perhaps maybe it's a longer term conversation about, other funding mechanisms that we might want to consider in the long term.
Thank you, Commissioner. Final comments? Madam Halshock, anything left with you?
Nope. Thank you very much, Mayor and Commission, for
Okay.
the conversation today. It was very helpful.
Yes, indeed. The discussion today was timely and helpful, and I appreciate all the input. We will move forward with this because I know it's important. Safe route to school is important. Slip, trip, and fall is very important, and we need to move forward. All right. If nothing else, and let me make sure we've exhausted this agenda before I call you off. Do you have your directions, Madam Manager?
I do. Thank you.
Okay.
Mayor.
At this time, we will adjourn the meeting. This meeting is formally adjourned.